Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Happy July. This should be coming out right after the holiday, so if you celebrate, happy 4th of July. If you don't, whatever, I'm with you. We're chilling. All right, let's talk about my monthly read, shall we? I hope you guys had a good reading month yourselves. I know I had a couple of you saying you were trying to finish some series up, so I hope you got your reading in. But let's talk about me now. The first book that I read this month is called The 7.5 Deaths of Evelynn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. Quite a mouthful. But this book is kind of a crazy, time travel-y, out-of-body experience. It's about a detective who gets sent to a weird state of being where he travels between different bodies, all that are living the same day, that are all at this same mansion, and his goal is to solve a murder, and that is how he escapes this endless cycle. He's been stuck in here for who knows how long, and if he can't solve the murder before he runs out of bodies, then he will start over again with no memory of the past cycle. So you spend a lot of time kind of getting stuck figuring out who you're in. You know, what kind of person is the detective today? Is he a drunkard? Is he, a jumpy freak? You never know. So it's kind of fun being like, who am I going to wake up as tomorrow? And getting your bearings with the detective as well. I thought this was kind of a chunky read. It wasn't really that it was long, it was just that it took a little bit for me to get into it, as I imagine the main character also took a little bit to get used to the whole situation. But once I got really like halfway through, it started cruising by for me. So I thought it was a really good read at that point, where you kind of are like, oh, I get what the whole plan is, what the ploy that's going on behind the scenes and everything. It's very interesting to see how the character sets things up for himself by using one character in the morning versus one in the afternoon. It's a really interesting read, and it's kind of hard to explain, but I highly recommend it if you like a good mystery and you like one that has kind of an interesting plot device, you know? Next book I read is called One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is a more fantasy style book. It takes place in a world that long ago had magic, but everything has a price. And eventually a very iconic guy, he made a bunch of cards so that people could use magic with a little less of a cost. And he was called the Shepherd King, and he made a bunch of cool different cards that each have different names. There's like the Maiden and the Black Horse and like stuff like that. And they each give you different abilities. Like the Maiden makes you beautiful, and the what was it called? Oh, the well gives you mind reading powers. So, but those still have a cost, but they take a little longer. And the big thing of this book is that somebody wants to try and unite all of these cards, because there's a big curse out on the land that is kind of like an infectious disease. If you go out into the woods, you might go a little crazy and you become someone of the spirit of the woods. You are hers now, and you go off to die for her. So somebody wants to save everybody by uniting the cards and releasing this curse. And so the story kind of follows the main girl, who has a strange interaction with the cards, and how she goes on to become a more independent person and embrace her own power and find love. As I roll my eyes, I will say the romance in this book was really backseat, and I didn't mind it too much because it wasn't like gross, but I didn't really love the romance feature because it was really just kind of a boring stereotypical romance, but it is what it is. At least it wasn't obnoxious. And that leads right into my next book, actually. My next book was the sequel to this book, which was called Two Twisted Crowns, also by Rachel Gillig, obviously. And this one I actually dropped at 48%. So I can't say too much about the plot, obviously, because I don't want to spoil anything, but it is a continuation of, unite the cards, end the curse, and it kind of switches into a POV style book where there's multiple POVs, and that is where I got really uninterested because one POV became the main girl's love interest, so it became his POV for the book, and then also one of his relatives, like his cousin, becomes his POV as well, and his cousin's POV is entirely about being obsessed with a girl so sexually and like having sex with her every chapter, and then like he has like this whole like marriage subplot going on too, and I was not gonna read that when half the book is garbage and half the book is actual plot. So I dropped that shit at like 50%. It just was not good. As soon as they introduced this marriage subplot, I knew it was gonna be a fucking disaster, so I decided not to waste my time because I was already having a busy month and I didn't get to read as many books as I wanted to this month, so I'm glad I didn't waste my time reading half of a book that I was not enjoying at all. But, you know, if that's your kind of thing, then go for it. I just hate when there's a POV in a book that's entirely unnecessary for propelling the plot. So I had to take a step back before I got too upset and angry. The next book on my list was definitely one that was out of my comfort zone. I like to try and pick at least one every month that I think is something I wouldn't normally read. This was a kind of scary, off-putting book called Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. It is about a couple who win a housing lottery and they win this like beautiful apartment, and they move in with their newborn who's like under a year old, and things are just kind of strange, you know? They never see their neighbors. The staff are just kind of like off-putting, you know? The building itself has a lot of mystery around it. Like, you don't hear a lot of stories about it, even though like famous people supposedly live there. And as they continue living there, things just get weirder and weirder, and the two of them both embrace it in different ways. So it's kind of interesting to see how they react to such strange situations and circumstances. The reason this book was kind of out of my comfort zone was, one, because it's about a couple baseline and a baby, which you all know I am not about children. So that was out of my comfort zone. There's also a lot of talk about pregnancy and, you know, obviously marriage problems, things like that. I just felt like it was a big step out of my zone to be like, oh, let me pick a book that's specifically about a couple. But I actually think it was okay because the couple was already established. I kind of hate the will they, won't they pining phase. So dealing with a couple that was already together was actually much more tolerable than I expected. So that was like a good thing to figure out about myself, to be like, I can read about couples that already exist. I just hate when they're all like, oh, does he like me? The way he looks at me, what's that feeling in his eye? I hate that shit. Get it out of here. So that was like perfectly fine. And I thought that even though some of the characters in this book drove me up the fucking walls, it was actually a really appropriate handling of the characters that drove me up the walls. So kudos to that. Kudos to that book. It also had a really crazy ending, and I highly recommend it. It was a pretty quick read. I think I read it in like 2 or 3 days. Big wreck. It was a good twisty read. I liked it a lot. The next book on my list is a classic fantasy that maybe even some of you have already read yourselves, and it's called The Poppy War by R F Kuang. Man, I love this book. I did not think I was gonna like it, and it definitely had some cringy dialogues in it, but I really thought it went well, you know? I think the book features a really powerful anti-hero, and that's not something I see often in fantasy books these days, so I'm quite excited about that. But the book basically features a girl who lives in a shithole, you know? She's adopted by a family that hates her and makes her just like be a slave, and she deals with a bunch of drug addicts all the time that are not, you know, like even nice in the slightest. And she gets the opportunity to take a test to get into a university to like become a soldier. And she studies her ass off and she gets into one of the top schools. And when she gets there, shit is not easy. People bully the fuck out of her. Classes are hard, but she pushes through. And basically a giant war breaks out and it's time to put all of her skills to the test. And this book is definitely in a wartime. So if that is something you are not into, I don't recommend reading it. It has a lot of dark topics and a lot of very intensely graphic stuff. So if that is sensitive for you, I don't recommend, but for me it was beautiful and juicy, and I am definitely going to read the sequel. You'll hear more about that series in my book haul video upcoming. Subtle plug. I did buy the whole series, so you will hear more about this one in the upcoming months. Probably one every month, but I won't put any spoilers out. But if you want to read and chat and, be caught up by the time I read it next month, feel free. I'm going to be reading Dragon Republic this month, so maybe we'll chat next month about that book. I think the main thing that I really liked about the Poppy War was its kind of religious feature, which is a weird thing to say, but there's a lot of spirituality and, worshiping gods and trying to establish a connection with yourself and your spiritual self. And it was just a really interesting read that was kind of unexpected for a fantasy magic world. So I thought that was a really interesting way of handling a magic system with linking it so strongly to spirituality, but in a way that wasn't like weirdly religious, just in a like ambiguous religious way. Definitely a strong system, and I'm excited to learn more about all of the crazy gods that are in that world. All right, the last book on my somewhat short list this month is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. I picked this book up while I was on my little road trip to get my brother, and I read it pretty quickly throughout. And I thought it was a really interesting kind of infectious disease book. It's about these girls who all go to this boarding school and everything's fine for a little while. And then suddenly the nature starts to get a little more vicious. And before they know it, they're all getting really sick and with really different things. Some of them grow extra spines. Some of them have random bruises that are painful and all over their bodies. Some of them get weird sores inside their mouths and random splits all over their skin. But some of them just become stronger or get weird features like scaly skin and glowing hair. And they don't know what's causing it, but they're forced into isolation, and the government is supposedly working on a cure for them and providing them with supplies, and they've just learned to adapt. And a long time ago, their school was full, but by the time this book takes place, there's only about 60 of them left, and things are getting desperate. And it features the main cast of like 3 girls. It switches between 2 perspectives, but there's a strong side character. And they're like a little friend group in the school. Everyone kind of sees them and respects them and doesn't bother them. And one of them eventually gets really sick and gets taken away to the infirmary, and they feel like something's not quite right. And so the other 2 characters decide to pursue it. And I thought this book was just really naturey and sapphic and great. And I mean, you can imagine why it's sapphic when you put a bunch of girls in a boarding school and then isolate them and they're not allowed to leave for like a year and a half. Yeah, a lot of them form some pretty gay relationships, and I love it for them, queens. It was a great read. I thought it was light, but also had just enough like goriness to it. Because like I said, these girls are getting sick in like crazy ways. So sometimes you just get like these really crazy descriptions of like somebody's body. So if you don't like body horror, not for you, just like Poppy War. But this is a good read. Otherwise, I think it was like so nice. I would have loved to like hike out to nature and read it there. I did it on a little, like I read it while we were driving through the woods and stuff, so that was pretty fun. But yes, that has been my June. I hope that you guys had some fun reads. Let me know if you have any reads that you got done or suggestions for me down below. And I should have a book haul video out soon. And yeah, it was great catching up, and I hope that you enjoy hearing about my little yappy reading habits. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys next month.